Hello and good afternoon. Today I'm joined by Jason Cabral from the AA. The AA have been a long-term client of mine, so I'm especially excited to speak with Jason. He is CEO of the AA Underwriting, based in Gibraltar. Before the AA, Jason was senior leader at Marker Study and AXA XL. As well as being a leader in general insurance, he is a father and speaks multiple languages. So let's meet Jason. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey Jeremy, thanks for having me.
Hello, it's brilliant to have you on. So the first thing I want to ask you is how did you get where you are today?
Well, probably need to go back almost to the start. So I'm from Bermuda originally, and we're a bit sad in Bermuda. The main industry is insurance. So kids were growing up wanting to be an astronaut or a fireman or a police officer. We grew up wanting to be actuaries and underwriters, sadly. But so it's a bit of a sad story. I studied to be an actuary and really liked the data side of things. But the reason I actually studied to be an actuary was because, like you mentioned, I speak languages. I love to travel, and I really wanted to use my career as like a platform to be able to travel. I'm really fortunate to have spent some time living in London, Singapore, Paris, and now I've been 6 years in Gibraltar. So it really has taken me kind of all over the place. And basically, on my career, when I was working in Singapore, I wanted to come back to Europe. So I decided to do an MBA in Paris. And once I finished that, I kind of fell into UK motor insurance with marker study, like you alluded to. And yeah, I realized that actually the UK motor space is one of the most interesting, dynamic, developing markets. And it's really cutting edge on things like AI, data integration and things. I really kind of fell in love with that part of the business. So it was kind of a roundabout way that took me around the world as an actuary, but also eventually ended up in kind of the UK motor market.
That's brilliant. And so you mentioned about the UK motor market. I also find it incredibly interesting. It is one of the most advanced markets in the world. What do you see as your mission for general insurance pricing in these markets?
So I think how to describe it's difficult to describe an overall mission. I think the data and integration and AI and modeling techniques are all well and good, but sometimes it's a bit of common sense that
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
helps out and knowing
yeah.
which
Mm.
data to actually go for and which data to look at. So I'll give you an example of something that we're looking to develop around young driver proposition. A lot of people have tried things on telematics, and we did also looking at kind of the telematics space. But then taking a step back and saying, well, actually, the AA in the UK has two of the biggest driving schools. We have British School of Motoring, BSM, and the AA Driving School. So if you think about it, who better to underwrite a risk than the actual driving instructor themselves, and who has the most data would be at the point of
Yeah.
source. So you want the driving instructor to be recommending their students or their best students into our ecosystem. So the way I look at it is my mission is actually to bring more common sense to what data should we be looking for and how do we integrate that into a proposition for the customer that's profitable for us, but also good value for the customer. I think another area I want to talk about connected cars. So one thing that we're doing as well at the AA is around looking at driving technology and connected cars. Most cars nowadays are kind of computers on wheels, right? If you look at every Ford actually manufactured now after 2019, that has a ton of connected car data so it's almost like telematics, but even more than that, because you could get information about when there's a claim. You could have a great customer experience to actually go, let's inform the insured directly. We'll get someone to recover the vehicle before they even have need to phone, right? It's about kind of looking at actually what's there today, what do we have, and how can we kind of better utilize that. In the future, it could be something like a pay-as-you-drive proposition, looking at that space. And because the A is actually very well positioned to kind of benefit from that, we have a lot of relationships already with the large vehicle manufacturers, and we're feeding information back to them. So it's really about kind of creating that life cycle, be it a young driver to come into the kind of the group, and then afterwards they buy a connected car, then we can better service the customers in that way. It's kind of about creating that ecosystem. So talking about that as well, in terms of EVs and electrification, in 2022, 17% of all new car sales in the UK were EVs. So it's almost 20%, but it's of new car sales. So it does take a while for that to become the general landscape within the UK. But one of my vision is for the AAA to help the UK on the journey to electrification. So to really be an enabler and a catalyst for that journey. So I think one of the barriers for people taking EVs is around the education. Should I have an EV? Am I going to be able to charge it? What do I do? So I think the A is well placed as well to be that link and understand what the customer's needs are and what are the barriers for them to move to an EV. On the data side, these are slightly different. They don't have horsepowers. There's not the standard data set's not the same. And also there's not a lot of data on EVs because it's not a large portion of the car park. So one of the things we did recently with our backers, Munich Re, was to use their data science team. So they have a data science team that can kind of look at independent projects. So we looked with them on all their UK data, but also European-wide data around vehicle repairs and everything to do with EVs to create kind of a bespoke overlay to our own EV rating within the UK to say which ones are more expensive to repair, which ones tend to have more accidents, understanding so kind of who buys certain types of EVs as well, but looking at a kind of a larger data set. So that's actually something that we've been able to do at a larger scale and kind of integrate within the pricing, because EVs are a quite small element of the market now, but if you don't get in there early and start collecting that information, then it's going to be difficult to write that into the future. So another bit is about driverless cars. And I don't think, well, I guess my personal opinion on this is that it's still probably a long way away, but it's not just a faraway dream anymore. Britain's actually the first country in Europe to approve a hands-free driving, which is the Ford Mustang Mach-E cars to do, I think, 2,300 miles on motorways in the UK. This is extremely interesting, frightening. I'm not, I feel a whole bunch of emotions about that. We're not currently writing any of those those cars in the initial stages. Let's just say we're more dipping our toe into that market rather than diving headfirst. I think it's still in the infancy, but we're focusing our efforts is really around moving towards driverless. The new kind of driverless technology is largely kind of road assist and everything. And it's really the ADAS systems that most cars get as standard these days. It's really understanding how that's affecting and changing the landscape within driving. Because typically what's happening is that ADAS systems are very good, but it's actually helping certain types of people. Some other people who've been driving for a long time might just switch them off and not use them at all. So I think it's really understanding who benefits from these systems, which ones are better. And there's a number of different data providers that we do retros with or are looking at to kind of integrate some of that additional data into our view of risk. I think people who select these as optional extras tend to be safer drivers as well. So it's kind of using the data to inform additional pricing. So I think the future is driverless cars, but the immediate urgency for the market is to really understand the ADAS systems, how they're developing, how that's affecting the overall market. The other big concern for insurers is around counter fraud. I think most insurers kind of have the basic on counter fraud and are pretty conservative when it comes to any area of fraud. And I think most insurers now, or pretty much all of the UK market who are on price comparison sites, use credit data to match customers to addresses. And one of the issues that we've found is that if somebody moves house, basically you kind of disappear off of the rules and data sets for a period of time. So that could be 3 months, but it could be as long as 9 months. And you can imagine if you change house, you probably want to shop around for a new insurance provider. You're probably buying home insurance again. So this can be a real issue. And actually probably about 5 to 10% of the UK do move house every year. So it's really disadvantaging a big chunk of the market that if people can't find you on electoral roll or any bank account details to that address, they just won't offer you a quote. So that ultimately kind of results in higher prices for people who just moved house. But the reason why insurers do that is because they're trying to prevent all the fraud. So it's kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So we actually have a joint partnership with a company called Who. Bit of a strange name, but a good product. In the future, we're going to look for those areas where you might have moved house, you're not on electoral roll, to push kind of a know your customer tool. So this is like an app that you take a selfie. It's a couple seconds. You take a selfie, take a picture of your driver's license, a utility bill if that's needed as well to match you to the new address.
Yeah.
and then bing bang bosh, you're in,
Awesome.
you're insured. I think
Yeah.
this is the way of making sure that you insure the right customers that actually have a legitimate need, and basically no fraudster is going to take a selfie and give you their driver's license. So,
Yeah. 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 Excellent.
my point here is actually there's data and modeling, but actually there's simpler ways we can kind of use technology and use data to open up areas of the market that I think previously insurers had just gone, all right, we're not touching this for various reasons. We don't want to go after that area
Yeah.
because there could be a high fraud risk. So I think the market, and actually this is quite standard in banking, kind of these KYC tools. When I moved to Gibraltar, I sold my place in London, and even the law firm sent me one of these tools to verify the IDs.
I find it really interesting where you're merging together the driving instructor's knowledge with the data, actually, because I think that's a real advantage you've got that no one else can really do that. And it's not always something people explore. I think that's really, really clever to be bringing that information in.
It's going back to basics sometimes with
Yeah.
data, just going, actually, what do we know? What do we have? What will be what do we, and having a hypothesis, what do we believe will be the most powerful? So you go, well, actually, who knows this person better? Probably their parents and then the driving instructor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe ask the driving instructor, if you were an insurance company, would you insure this person? And they go, oh no, not in my life. They pass their test by the skin of their teeth. Or no, they're very confident driver, going to be good. So I think it's just, yeah, exactly, kind of going back to basics. And I think some of the kind of the future of insurance data and AI, I think traditionally pricing's been very much kind of like GLM based in the UK. I think in some ways we're moving to GBM tools like integrated into pricing around kind of market models and things. I think with price comparison sites, it's the most highly competitive. We have a very standard homogeneous product. Price
Yeah.
comparison websites are kind of drives the price to the bottom, and you kind of end up in this winner's curse. The business you're writing could be good business, but it's largely where your models are potentially wrong. If you look at what you do when you model, you have a data set, which will be a historical data set, and you are using that to predict the future. So one of the main assumptions you make in that process is that the future will be like the past. But we
Yes.
just talked about ADAS, driverless cars, EVs, that move to electrification, connected cars, that additional data and what's changing. Not to mention, we just went through 2-3 years of a global pandemic
Yeah.
that seriously affected driving. The fact that I'm doing this from my spare bedroom, which is now my home office, it just shows you the way we're working is different. So maybe using a pre-COVID data set or a COVID data set to predict the future could be very relevant, could be very
Yeah.
different. I think we need to, again, go back to basics. We have more and more technology. A machine learning algorithm will produce you the best model based
Yeah.
on the historical data if you do it properly. To what extent should you use that to predict exactly what the future is, or can you make tweaks to it? I think GLMs are probably easier to make because it's more understandable. They're probably easier to make kind of qualitative adjustments to things on what you believe the future will be like. But I think sometimes machine learning, again, is very good at making a model based on a scenario. But I think humans are very good at imagining what the future could be like, should be like, and changing that future and adapting to that, right? So I think it's very much understanding the models, but understanding the limitations of that as well and trying to extrapolate that into the future.
Yeah. I see a lot of opportunity in the uncertainty of the future. AI is changing our world, but that's actually making things less certain. It's actually making the future harder to predict. And that interestingly makes our skills more relevant and more important.
I agree with that 100%. And I see a lot of people get worried about AI is coming, it's going to take all my jobs. I think people who do data and really understand what the capabilities are or the ability to actually integrate that into the business, it's invaluable. So I think I would see probably job creation in that aspect. The big kind of buzzword now, which I love as well, is actually the chat GPT and the
Yeah.
large language models.
Mm.
And it's incredibly impressive how quickly and what that's kind of come to. I don't think it has a ton of implication on insurance pricing, but if you think of the claims journey right now, again, we talked about insurers being a bit behind the curve.
Yeah.
A lot of the claims journey is still ringing up an ethanol person, and explaining to several different people the same event that's just happened. So where I kind of see the future moving here is very much around electronic notification of loss. But rather than bringing in to somebody, they're logging a claim online. And traditionally, the barrier to that had been people want to speak with somebody. And if you think about the large language model, you could train something like that on all the ethanol data you have, right? You could then have a tool where it's like a virtual assistant. And I don't think that's too far off. It's really an interesting kind of landscape for insurers. It doesn't have to be perfect, but actually there's a big advantage for even a simple tool where people can log things and afterwards get repairs booked in, keeping people up to date with the repairs and what's happening. This is what people want to hear. It'd be great to get a couple texts in the day saying, oh, your car is at this repairer and they're starting work on it now and you can expect to pick it up tomorrow. That's kind of what people expect in this modern age of getting overnight deliveries and everything.
Yeah.
They don't want to be ringing their insurer every 5 minutes to see what's happening with their car.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
As these models are improving, I think the only way to do it is to test it and to see what would happen. And then if you and have some sort of get out. So again, keep common sense to it. If somebody wants to speak to a human, please speak to a human and then understand what were the weaknesses of the model, what could be improved. And I think it is a paradigm shift in what can be done with it. I think insurance pricing has developed in so far that I'm not sure these LLMs and things will improve that any further. Maybe you can integrate new data sources you didn't have before, potentially. But to a large extent, I think it's been like a race for additional data sources and data enrichment. It was almost like an arms race for the last 10 years.
Definitely. That's how I would describe it. It's an arms race because even a small amount of improvement in your ability to forecast claims can be millions of pounds of benefit because it's such a furiously competitive market.
Definitely. Internally, I'm frequently, it's going to spend this much money to integrate new data and it's a project. What value is that going to bring? It'll probably bring some value, but then at a certain point, all your competitors will have it as well. So then neutral value. So there's not a choice to stand still, really. If you don't do it, then the opportunity cost of not doing it is much higher because you get picked off by competitors to cherry pick the better risks and you'll get anti-selection. So it's not really an option to sit still. There's kind of an endless amount of things you could integrate. So it's really about what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's right. And I always think it's important from the customer's point of view that we're working always towards making that price more and more accurate. I really want everyone to pay the exact right price for them as a person. And integrating new data sources moves us along that journey. And it's also good for business. And like you say, if you're ever not sure about the benefit of data, you can think to yourself, well, what would it be like if everyone else had this data and I hadn't done it yet? What positions is my client going to be in that situation?
Definitely. As things get better in terms of fraud detection and everything, what you want to do is not make innocent people pay the price of fraud. I gave the example of what we're doing around that electoral roll and address mapping. Anyone who moves house is paying at a higher price because loads of insurers are saying, all right, you're lumped into a group of people who are potentially lying about their address, which as an innocent person who's just moved house, you don't really want to be lumped in that group. So I think data and accurate pricing is really key for allowing people to pay the right price. It's never going to be perfect, but I agree with you. It should be the goal of as accurate as possible.
Absolutely. I find it interesting going back to what you were saying about electric vehicles. We're 6-7 years away from all new vehicles being electric. It's going to arrive quite quickly. And I think that's going to be a very big change to the market.
Yeah, I think it's quite an exciting development. It's a real change in people's mindsets. For insurers, it's a bit of a minefield out there at the moment. I mean, we're trying to do more electric vehicles and we have kind of changes in policy wording. But my vision is really a proper product that's integrating some added value to insurance. So getting people comfortable with adopting EVs, maybe discounts for home installation, being able to link all that through the AA app. We'll do this with the AA because actually they're making the solution easier for customers. There are some headwinds on that journey because I think a lot of the manufacturers put so much emphasis on producing new cars with such a backlog. They kind of forgot about the after parts market. We were doing some research around repairs on some EVs. I won't name any large manufacturers, but one specific large manufacturer If their EV broke down, you'd only be able to take it back to the manufacturer's repair centers, and only
Yeah.
30% of those were able to repair the EV. So you
Yeah.
imagine the additional delays, the distance you have to take the vehicle, all the rest, it just adds up to cost, right? So I think at the moment, there's a lot of benefits for moving to EV, but from an insurer's perspective, it's still kind of dipping a toe in and moving slowly because it's a bit of a changing market out there.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily have the data at the moment. Even the past data we've got is not relevant because there's the supply issues you were just talking about. So we've got to use a lot of judgment and the understanding to try and work out what we should be doing.
Yeah, and I think that's again, it's the common sense approach to understanding what the overall thing is, and taking a bit of a punt. Like there'll be certain areas where you go, actually, these manufacturers have their secondhand parts, or they use the same or similar vehicle body as the non EV version. So you kind of go, well, right, these ones, but not others, right? So it's kind of being a bit choosy and understanding why you're doing that from an underwriting perspective. But again, it goes back to data. You have to marry the data that you have on EVs, albeit small, with what's happening in the real world. I think as these become more common, a lot of these problems will eventually go away. Like every repair shop will have to repair EVs at some point if the whole car park is EV, or else they're not really in business. So,
Yeah.
it will change over time.
Yeah, definitely. I remember a conversation recently with a garage, and I was like, "You're changing over to EVs?" And the chap was like, "It's very expensive at the moment, so we're not really sure what we're going to do." And I was thinking to myself, you're going to have to. You might not want to right now, but one day, if you want to stay in business, that's what's going to happen.
No, exactly, exactly. A lot of repair shops are struggling at the moment because there's inflation in the UK, but also wage inflation. Yeah, they will have to do it, but it's going to be a big investment. I think the whole UK will need to move to that at some point. It's close to 20% of new car sales, but it will still take probably 5, 6 years before that really feeds into a meaningful size. I think the overall UK car park's about 3% EV at the moment, but it is forecast to rise fairly quickly as new car sales increase, the proportion increases.
Yeah, that's right. I definitely agree with you when it's talking about autonomous vehicles as well. I think people had an idea that at some point we'd all just suddenly switch to cars that drive themselves, but it feels like it's going to be a very gradual transition over a long time as the car slowly gets more and more abilities to assist. It does just seem to be a very complicated problem.
I think it is a very complicated problem. You see it in the likes of big, deep pocketed companies like Google, Apple, almost giving up on the dream of it. So
Indeed.
I think it was a more complicated problem than a lot of people had imagined. But at some point, you probably get to things say, oh, actually, it's too dangerous to let people drive on a motorway. But I think that's in kind of 20 or 30 years. So that's why I was saying in the short term, kind of the next 3 to 5 years, we're really focused on kind of ADAS technology, who uses it, what does it help with, where do people drive with it in comparison to where they live. Because imagine a young driver who's just passed their test that now has some ADAS technology, I think is a very different risk than they got their grand's old
It
broken
is,
down car, right?
actually. Yes, it is. Yeah, 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 yeah. They've got the 12-year-old Peugeot that's,
Exactly. Well,
yeah,
I rented, so I got the basics like the drive assist and even the back end camera, which I think is pretty ubiquitous now. But I had a rental car the other day and it didn't have the back end camera. I
yeah.
didn't know how to reverse. I was
No,
like,
yeah, yeah.
I've actually forgotten how to reverse. So I think
Yeah,
it's like you get so used to the technology that actually
yeah,
we've become to rely on it. And I think it is more helpful for certain groups. So older drivers, reaction times are not as fast, or younger drivers whose reaction times are not as fast
yeah.
will benefit more
Mm.
from it than a more mature driver.
I think it's the steady transition over to it. And that in itself, again, I think presents a lot of opportunities for us because of the uncertainty.
No, definitely, definitely. Well, I think it's a dangerous area of this hybrid car driving, person driving. I mean, that new car that's been approved to do motorway use, you still have to have your eyes on the road, and then
Yeah,
there's something viewing your eyes, and if you take
yeah,
it away, it will slowly stop and park you on the side of the motorway,
yeah.
which slowly stopping and parking on the side of the motorway sounds a bit dangerous to begin with.
uh, yeah, absolutely. It does. It does. Yeah.
um, it'll be interesting to see how that develops and what that kind of looks like in the next few years. Because yeah, when people are still driving and they're kind of not driving, but you still should be in control, is a very interesting question. Because can somebody really adapt back into taking the driving if they hadn't been driving for the last 2 hours or so, right? And I think we just have to, again, like you said, monitor it and see what the developments are. Maybe it's a ton more safer and they force everyone to have it.
I do think that will be the case where the driverless vehicles are actually better than the humans, and the view will become, well, we probably shouldn't let people drive because they are the worst risks.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I don't see that being the end of insurance. I still think there'll be so much information there, even when the vehicle's autonomous, where someone drives, when they drive, the vehicle they've got, and all of that is still going to affect the risk. And unfortunately, I do think there'll still be claims in the future. No system will be 100%. Even autonomous vehicles will still have accidents.
Definitely. I mean, I think insurance will change, but there'll be other risks, right? Cyber risks. I think the nature of it will change, but there'll still be insurance. There'll still be a need for it, definitely.
Definitely. Okay, well, thank you ever so much for your time this afternoon, Jason. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of mention before we wrap up?
No, I think it was my general thing was data is very powerful, but also I think use your common sense and I think again, I think don't be fooled by too accurate a number. That's always my sort of message, that sometimes when we put things into a model and get an exact number back to 3 decimal places, we have a bit of a bias to assuming that number is correct. But I think always understand what the limitations of any model are, and that even on the best models, historical performance is no kind of prediction of future performance. So similarly, humans are still, for the time being, better than machines at kind of predicting or imagining a future outcome. So actually, I think it's the best are the ones who know how to use technology, but also adapt that to what we believe will be true in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great message to say we've got the data, but we need to use our knowledge, intuition, common sense as well alongside that.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Jason. Excellent.